Hello again, YouTubers. This is going to be a continuation of my series of Canadian records by Canadian artists, and today I'm going to feature a band called The Collectors. The Collectors in the 1970s evolved into Chilliwack, and before they were The Collectors, they were known as the C-Fun Classics, the Canadian Classics, and I'm going to dedicate this episode and this video to the original bass player of the Classics and the Collectors and Chilliwack by the name of Glenn Miller. And unfortunately, very sadly, Glenn passed away in March of 2011, and I had the very good fortune of exchanging a few emails with Glenn a couple of years ago where he was describing his time in the Collectors and the Classics before that. He was a very, very nice gentleman, tremendous guy, and a great friend to musicians and fans everywhere. And this is a picture of the Classics circa 1963-64. Here's Glenn, bass guitar. Also a later member of the Collectors, Howie Vickers, lead vocals, and Claire Lawrence, who played saxophone in the Collectors. And there were three other members of the Classics at that time. The guitarist's name was Brian Russell, and something that's always been a mystery to me, I don't know if he's the same Brian Russell who recorded later on as Brian and Brenda Russell, and later married Cheryl Ladd, actually. But apparently Brian Russell did go back east to Ontario and to Toronto and became a session musician, guitarist, and I see his name on many Canadian recordings from the 1970s. Now, the Classics recorded as the C-Fun Classics because they were associated with CFUN radio station, the pop station in Vancouver. They were kind of their house band around 1964, and they charted some records on the charts, the C-Fun charts, which are actually online, which are pretty cool. And they are also called the Classics, and when they went down to the States to record around 1964-65, they were called the Canadian Classics, so as they wouldn't be confused with other bands called the Classics at that time. This is another photograph from around 1965. There's Claire Lawrence, Howie Vickers, and Glenn Miller on bass. And with they were the hosts, or the house band of a TV show, a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company TV show called Let's Go and Music Hop. Back east we called it Music Hop, but in Vancouver I think they called it Let's Go. And it was a daily TV show. It was on after school, and I used to come home from school to watch it. It was kind of like American Bandstand in a way. But the Monday's show was from Vancouver, and the Classics were the house band for that TV show. And there was another show from Winnipeg. I think it was on Tuesday nights, and later on in 1967-68, the house band that would be playing every week was the Guess Who, and that was always a great show. The Guess Who were just a fantastic band, even in 1967-68. And there was a Toronto show on Wednesdays. Thursdays was Montreal. Fridays was Halifax. And the Glenn related to me that they were a very hard-working band, the Classics, at this time. They did a lot of touring throughout BC, Western Canada. He said they toured with Roy Orbison and the Candymen, the backup band. The Candymen went on to become the Atlanta Rhythm Section. And he said he was offered a job by Buddy Knox, the old rocker, at one time to play bass with Buddy Knox's band, but he turned them down because the Classics and the Collectors were a really up-and-coming young band. Now, if you're a fan of Vancouver rock and roll, there are 4 albums that are essential. They're called The History of Vancouver Rock and Roll, and this is Volume 1. And these still might be available through Neptune Records in Vancouver. The first volume contains Aces High, one of the first recordings by the Classics. This is Volume 2. It does not contain anything by the Collectors or the Classics. Now, in 1966, the Classics split up, and Ross Turney, which is this gentleman here, he was forming a new band, and Claire Lawrence, Glenn Miller, Howie Vickers, came out of the classics. Bill Henderson on guitar, and Ross Turney on drums, and they formed the Collectors. And this photograph is probably from around 1967. It's a record company, Warner Brothers, promotional photograph for the band. It's advertising a performance or a show, I think in Edmonton, Alberta, around that time, probably from either 68 or 69. Now, the Collectors recorded in Los Angeles. They were signed to Valiant Records, the same label that the Association was signed to. And Valiant Records was eventually taken over by Warner Brothers. So they were signed to Warner Brothers after that. This is part 3 of the Vancouver Rock series. And it does contain a very early Collectors hit song. At least it was a hit in Canada. It's called Looking at a Baby. I think it was released in April of '67, and it was a hit in Toronto. I know when I was a teenager. And the covers on these are by an artist called Bob Mass, who was kind of a psychedelic artist in Vancouver in the late 1960s, and he also did the cover of the Collectors' first album. This is Volume 4, and it does contain 2 Collectors songs, Eyes and Don't Feel Bad. In either late '67 or early '68, the Collectors relocated to California and were down there for a year or so, I think. And they toured. They performed throughout California. They played Whiskey A Go Go, the Avalon Ballroom, the Fillmore. They were, they shared the stage with the big bands, big California bands of the time. The Doors, the Jefferson Airplane, people like that. And they were very well received down there because their music was progressive, very progressive. It had a sound, I'd say it was kind of a cross between almost Jethro Tull and the Association. I say the Association because their vocals were kind of layered. They had very good harmonies. They were good singers. And this is the first Collectors album released in early 1968. It's on Warner Brothers. The cover by Bob Mass. It was produced by Dave Hassinger, and Dave Hassinger had recorded with the Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, and the Electric Prunes. He produced the Electric Prunes album, or singles, first 2 albums. And what's interesting about this album is side 2. The whole side is an entire suite of music, and that's something that that bands really didn't do, that kind of thing. In 1967-68. It wasn't until a little bit later that bands started recording suites of music, which is a very progressive kind of thing for the Collectors to have done. They did have a single that was a very modest hit single on this album called Lydia Purple. They did not compose Lydia Purple, but it was a very good song, and it was a minor hit. New Vibrations from Canada. Now, Dave Hassinger was also the producer of the Electric Prunes. And this is the 3rd Electric Prunes album. It's called Mass in F minor. Music composed by David Axelrod. The Electric Prunes were not tremendously good musicians. They broke up during the recording of this album, and the recording was supplemented by members of Chilliwack, or the Collectors, sorry, and which is kind of interesting because Hassinger really believed in. Those are pictures of members of the Electric Prunes, although this album really has nothing to do with the Electric Prunes except for the name. But members of the Collectors did play on this. Hassinger liked them as musicians. They played their own instruments. They were very, very good musicians. This is a single by the Collectors from 1968. It's called We Can Make It on Warner Brothers. Flip side, Fat Bird. And this is a single from their following album called Grass and Wild Strawberries. It's My Love Delights Me, Early Morning. This is the 2nd Collectors album. It's called Grass and Wild Strawberries. It was produced by Dave Hassinger. It's on Warner Brothers. It was released in 1969, I think. And here's Glenn Miller Howie Vickers, Bill Henderson with pipe, Ross Turney, and Claire Lawrence. Now the Collectors composed all the music on this album, but the lyrics were by a Canadian playwright by the name of George Riga. He'd previously written a very, very successful and famous Canadian play called The Ecstasy of Rita Jo. So it's kind of experimental in nature. The music is fantastic. This was the first Collectors album that I had. It's very, very nice. Was not a hit, obviously. It's quite obscure now, but I really, really liked it. It's when I really got into the Collectors music and stuff. And soon after this, the band started coming apart, though. They did record one more single on London Records instead of Warner Brothers. They left Warner's. This is 1970. I Must Have Been Blind, written by the Collectors. The flip side is called The Beginning. It's all instrumental on this, the flip side, and it's very psychedelic, kind of droning guitars, almost like bagpipes in a way, and it has a bit of a tinge of country to it too, which is odd. And this was a bit of a hit back in Toronto where I grew up. Now, as I said, the band started coming apart. Glenn Miller and Howie Vickers did leave the band, although Glenn was to return about a year later or so into Chilliwack, but then they changed their name. The name The Collectors was not chosen by them, it was chosen by the record company. So they became Chilliwack, and in the next episode I will show you the albums of the band Chilliwack. Thank you for watching.